In today's video, we're checking out a fast and affordable full-frame prime lens for L, E, Z, and R mounts. This is the 7 Artisan 75mm f1.4 prime. This is small and compact. It's also very fast, giving you some crazy bokeh and a vintage character that will appeal to photographers and video shooters who are looking for that particular style of look. I've been testing this out over the last few weeks in a range of different situations, which I'll share with you in this video. But this is a fun lens for the right type of shooter, and I hope you get a kick out of it. Now, all of this sample reel was shot with my Lumix S9 over here with a range of different color profiles. Let's get into it. Welcome back, folks. My name's Shane. I hope you're doing well. In today's video, we're checking out this 7 Artisan 75mm f1.4 manual focus prime lens for the L mount. Now, this has been a really fun lens to shoot with. Being that this lens is 100% manual, I wasn't sure how I'd feel about it after shooting with a few of the 7 Artisan's autofocus lenses recently, but the experience overall was quite positive. There's definitely a few considerations with this lens though, and if you know the channel, you know I list pros and cons in all of my reviews, so stay tuned for a balanced review as per always. At the time of producing this video, the 7 Artisan 75mm f1.4 prime comes in at $189 in the US, which translates out to about $279 in Australia. For that price, it's a bargain, and I consider this solid value considering the price point. Now, before we get into this video, just the usual disclaimer, this was sent in from 7 Artisan, so massive thanks to them for sending this out. They have no input into this video or get to preview it ahead of launch, and as always, all thoughts are my own. Let's quickly cover build quality because there's a lot to like about the feel of this lens. Now, this lens is an all metal housing or metal construction here that feels great in the hand. Now, the lens itself feels like a tank coming in at 443 grams with the rear and front lens caps attached and 408 grams with the caps off. Now, speaking of the lens cap, this front one right here is all metal as well, and it screws into place on the 58mm front filter thread over here. There's no lens hood provided on this lens, but the glass is kind of like recessed back a bit, or enough at least, so I didn't really miss having one. Now, the good news is if you want to use ND filters or polarizers, you can. Just screw them in without any issues at all. This prime lens is loaded with a great feeling aperture ring here, and it clicks into place on all the values listed on it. So it will click into place on f1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8 and 16. While you can use the aperture values between the clicks, they just won't click into place in those particular areas. So just keep that in mind if that's something that will bother you. Now, I did kind of notice because of this though, I was using primarily the clicked options, but maybe that's just me. The feel of the aperture ring is great, and it's not accidentally going to be moved if it's in one of the clicked positions. So no problems there in terms of tension. Another thing that feels great on this lens is the focus ring here. It's always fun using a manual focus lens that has hard stops on either side right here. And this stops you having to worry about focus by wire issues or making sure your camera and lens is compatible with the linear focusing options in the menu. So this just works, which is great. The tension is nice and firm. This kind of reminds me of the 7 Artisan Cine lens I reviewed a while back, which has a really great feel to it. So if you like to pull focus manually, you'll enjoy using this lens. This lens gives us 6 elements in 6 groups, and being that it's a fast full frame lens, you can achieve some really great background blur and subject separation. If you like a little tone, you'll get a kick out of this. All right, let's address the focal length here because it's not every day I get to review a 75mm lens. Usually it's either a 50, a 55, an 85mm lens, for example. It's really great to see something a little bit different. This focal length works great from just general photography to portraits and full body shots where you want your subject to really pop from the background. Now, we went down to a dusty back roads here, little farming area, to shoot some sample photos, and I was really impressed with how this lens renders a scene. The colors and contrast all look great here. The sky looks beautiful with minimal vignetting in the corners, and the subject is really popping from the background. The background blur itself looks really smooth to my eye. I did get some mixed results depending on the shooting scenario, but as you can see from these examples, I think it all looks really smooth. I love how easily it is to create different types of layers. This shot has the foreground and the background out of focus, which really adds a nice depth to the image. Shooting at f1.4 with this lens will definitely give you some really impressive shallow depth of field. At the start of the video, I mentioned that this lens can give you some pretty vintage vibes and character. So here's an example of how the lens renders a scene with the sun hitting the elements. This is an effect I haven't seen on a lens in quite some time, and I actually think it looks pretty cool. When I change the angle of the photo slightly, the color of the sun here changes and it looks more natural, but it got more of a spotlight effect going on in this particular case. Now, if you point the lens towards a bright light source, you'll notice a drop in contrast, but it's not that much, and you can easily add that back to some extent in post-production. Here's a couple of black and white shots using the Leica monochrome picture profile on the Lumix S9, which I think came up really nice. The two biggest drawbacks of the 7 Artisan 75mm f1.4 lens is that it suffers from more flaring than I was expecting, and also a bit of chromatic aberration, especially when shooting wide open at f1.4. If it bothers you, just shoot away from the sun, stop down to about f2.8, and it cleans up a lot of the end result. If you're looking for a clinically clean lens, this one won't be the one for you. All right, let's talk about sharpness. So this lens, being that it has that sort of character and vintage vibe to it, at f1.4, it's a little bit soft in the center, but this goes away as soon as you start stopping down to about f2.8, which is really cool. I shot a lot of these test samples also at f4, and I think that's the real sweet spot for this particular lens. Looking at the edge of frame, vignetting is kept to a minimum. I haven't done any post-production or corrections to any of these photos other than just add a little bit of saturation here and there. And as you can see, vignetting is not an issue. Another positive to this lens is that I didn't notice much in the way of distortion, which is great. So there's no way to get any in-camera corrections from a manual focus lens. So here's a few more photographs taken at various apertures, and the images all look nice and sharp to my eye. The minimum focus distance though is 0.7 meters or 70 centimeters, which is about average for a lens like this with this focal length. All right, let's cover video. So if you're a video shooter, then 75mm is a really usable focal length, which allows you to use it for talking headshots, you know, a tight frame right about here, for example, or in any sort of filmmaking scenario. This is a great lens for creative short films, documentaries, or YouTube studios where you need something tighter than a 50mm lens, but not quite as tight as an 85. Thanks to the modern sensors in a lot of the new cameras, and also pairing it with the full frame f1.4 aperture lens, it will perform great in low light scenarios, which opens up budget options for folks shooting in darker situations. The bokeh balls look great to my eye. They do get a bit sort of cat's eye towards the edge of frame, but again, they look pretty wild. I was able to easily get the starburst effect here just by stopping down to about f8 or f10. Even in a low lit situation, it looks great. Another thing I really enjoyed using in combination with my S9 was the S&Q mode shooting 4K 60. This actually crops into an APS-C sensor size, which turns this 75mm lens here into a 112mm lens, which is great for almost getting telephoto shots. This shot was in APS-C crop mode, and as you can see, the seagull here still pops from the background. You can also see a little bit of purple fringing on the bird here in this shot, but otherwise I still think it looks great. Now, if you manually set the IBIS on your camera to 75mm when you attach the lens to it, a little menu thing will pop up, or if you plan on using the IS boost mode in your Lumix camera, the footage is nice and stable. It's also quite usable in combination with the E-stabilization settings in the camera set to standard. Remember that this is a 75mm lens on a full frame camera body, and to get this level of stabilization makes this lens way more usable for video work than I was initially anticipating. While I'm a big fan of how the focus ring feels, there's definitely some focus breathing when shooting video. So you will see the edges of frame zoom in and out a bit. It's definitely not the worst I've ever seen, but definitely not the best. Alrighty, let me know your thoughts on this lens in the comment section. I'm going to give you some final thoughts about this lens and whether or not I would use it personally. So value for money, this lens is really great value. And while it does have some issues with flaring and chroma, I still had a lot of fun shooting with it. But under the right circumstances, I'll definitely be using this lens more. Now this is a fun lens to use if you're into manual focus lenses, but optically, it definitely has some compromises. The form factor, build quality, all that kind of stuff is great. If you want a fun lens to use for photography or video that doesn't break the bank, this will be a great choice if you like the vintage vibe and its character. For 189 bucks, I think this represents great value if you can live with some of its small compromises. Thanks for watching. My name's Shane. Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell, all that kind of stuff. And I will see you on the next one. Catch you soon.